Welcome to another episode of Intellicide, where we discuss who murdered intelligence and common sense. I'm your host, Anthony Gentry, and my co-host, Kyle Palmenville. And today we're going to talk about the UnitedHealthcare CEO, his murder, and the different topics that are related to that. So what do
Everything
you
around
think,
it.
Kyle?
Happy holidays.
Yes, yes. Happy holidays.
Um, I mean, obviously the whole thing's tragic. When we talked before, did I mention to you the article that I wrote saying, about like America entering a post rule of law society?
You've mentioned that, but I don't recall the article that you said you wrote.
Okay, I'll send you a link to it if you don't have it, but it's I wrote it a few weeks ago, and it is when this happened, that's like what I thought of. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's vigilantism
Hmm.
is, in my opinion, a part of American culture. It's like a deeply rooted part of American culture for a lot of different reasons.
Right.
It's a reason that we're the country that invented Batman and the Punisher, and we still celebrate him to this day. You'll still see people out there with Punisher stickers on their cars, and
Hmm.
Batman's still making movies.
Right.
Um, Vigilantism, I think, stems from uh, the fact that a lot of Americans don't really trust in the government and by extension the police.
Hmm.
And therefore, there is this strain of thought in American culture of taking the law into one's own hands.
Hmm.
And that's, um,
Right.
part of what happened here, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And
I
that's
mean,
part of why like you mentioned, the reaction to this by the public is that
oh
there's
yeah.
and a very strong, and what's interesting to me is it is very close to class consciousness. It's like
Hmm.
Americans are coming very close to actually having class consciousness because if this is something that the initial reaction was not left or right. I kind of saw the
Right.
same thing on both sides of the aisle where the initial reaction was, well, I can understand why someone would hate our health insurance, because
Hmm.
everybody's had that experience in America.
Right.
But then um, the media and America starts to frame things as left versus right in order to keep everyone from realizing that it's really up versus down.
Hmm.
And that's, I think,
Well,
that's
again, it was a murder,
it was.
and
Well, I mean, yeah,
it, we don't want to make light of someone actually having his life taken away. Now, we as law-abiding citizens, people who we would consider ourselves rational, I don't think we're going to fully, place ourselves in his shoes to say, "Hey, I agree with you on that,"
I
and
wouldn't
making that
condone it,
change.
that's for sure.
Right. So, but
But
I can, like you said, I can see where someone has been pushed to a certain point
mhm.
where they're like, "Hey, I feel anger, I feel frustrated, and I'm going to do this."
Mhm.
Doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean that I agree with him, but I can see where certain factors and I don't care
Yeah,
what anyone says about the American healthcare system. If you have money, then it's the best. If you don't have money, then you are at the behest of these companies that have to make a for-profit decision that we're not going to meet certain levels of care because
right.
we're not making a profit on that.
Yeah.
And that's what our healthcare system is. It's for profit.
So I follow like AI news, right? So I
Mhm.
mean, part of what I thought was interesting about this story was that I had heard of Brian Thompson just
Mhm.
recently before he got shot,
Mhm.
because he was in the news because what he was actually there for that day was an investors meeting
Mhm.
where he was going to basically brag about the profits that he made by switching his claims department, his claims approval to AI that
Mm.
denied like 90% of the claims for that
Wow.
year.
Wow. Well,
And so it was like an example. I'd read about it as an example of like, a flawed use of AI. And it's like a criticism of AI,
mhm.
like the way that
Wow.
companies are implementing it, because the way he did it was so, unethical that,
Mhm.
it denied a lot of people health care and hurt a lot of people
Right.
in the process. And I think that's the thing that is really overlooked in the conversation is that when that happens, a lot of people see that as violence enacted upon them. Even though it's a corporate decision and it's just business, it is when it kills someone you love or hurts you,
Right.
it's still a violence enacted upon you.
Right. Well, I don't know if you saw it. I saw a tweet earlier this week where they had said United Healthcare's percentage of denials was twice the
Hmm.
industry average.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that's troubling.
Well, yeah. And from what I understand, that's the reason that he had targeted that CEO.
Hmm.
He was angry at the healthcare industry and the inequity
Hmm.
of it all, but he wasn't actually, as I understand it, a customer of UnitedHealthcare.
Right.
He targeted them specifically because they were the largest and the most egregious example
Wow.
of that kind of profiteering.
Hmm.
Which, so if I could, really quick, I'd like to tell a story that might illustrate where I'm kind of coming from on this.
Okay.
Um, just to preface this, so like when I was younger, my parents got divorced,
Hmm.
and my parents had what was described to me by one of their lawyers as one of the longest, most protracted divorce cases in the county, in Michigan, in Bay County.
Hmm.
And they, so it was a very nasty, bitter divorce, compared to like War of the Roses.
Okay.
Well, then in the early 90s, my mom came down with cancer. She went through chemo, it went into remission.
Hmm.
Then a few years later, in the late 90s, her cancer came back. The insurance company that she had at the time, Blue Cross Blue Shield, um, didn't just deny her claim. They said, well, that cancer is a pre-existing condition, and they canceled her policy. So
Mm.
she had no insurance at all.
Right.
And they said that they did it because now she was no longer basically a viable, they couldn't make a profit off of her.
Hmm.
So they just canceled the policy
Right.
entirely. Um, and because of that, she had to go about a year without any treatment. And
Damn.
during that year, my father was the one who came back and defended her for free and
Hmm.
took on the insurance company and got her policy back,
Hmm. Right.
all pro bono. So by the
Yeah.
time she was able to start treatment, it was too late. It had spread to her lymph nodes, and it was pretty much over. Um,
Man, I'm sorry to hear that.
so that's the thing that when the ACA was being discussed, I kept telling that story over and over because it is one of those things that the health insurance industry makes all sorts of decisions um, to increase profits that hurt people.
Right.
And
Yep.
that's why I'm a big believer that the profit motive has no place in certain industries, right? Like I'm
Oh
not,
yeah,
a lot of
absolutely.
people like to frame it as you either have to believe in capitalism or communism or socialism, whatever. It's a all or nothing with all of these things. My personal take on it is that you build a system by using pieces that work. And in my opinion, there are certain industries that the profit motive doesn't work in. The
Mm.
police, fire department, anything that has to do with life and death, for the most part, we can agree you shouldn't have a profit motive. Like you shouldn't have the fire department going, you know what, you didn't pay your fire department bill this month on time, so we're just going to let your house burn. You
Well,
know,
okay.
I
And
mean,
I agree with you. So
but that's the same
military as
thing. We should
well.
extend that to healthcare.
There's no profit. Like we're not looking for a profit from the military perspective. Now, defense
Right.
contractors, yes, but the
Right.
military is not out there to try to make a profit on defending the country. You can't.
Right. Yeah, and it's the same thing with the mail service. A lot of people
Hmm.
talk about, oh, the mail lost money. It's like, well, it doesn't lose money. It's not a business. It's a government
Right.
service.
Right.
There are certain things that we collectively decide to pool our money together and provide for ourselves,
Right.
and so in my opinion, that's one of the things that healthcare really should be. And I think that's a conversation that the media doesn't want to have because a lot of the media is owned by these same companies,
Right.
and we spend so much in this country on healthcare every year that,
Hmm.
they don't want to, you know, risk
Hmm.
that profit. There's a lot of people making a lot of money off of it the way that it is.
Yeah,
People like Brian
absolutely.
Thompson.
Right. Well,
And
I
that's
mean,
where a lot of that
again,
anger comes from. So I don't condone what Brian Thompson or what that Luigi
Mangione, I think his name.
allegedly did, because we don't
Hmm.
know for certain that he did it, right? Like
Hmm.
he's accused, but for all I know, he's a patsy, you know?
Right. Well, and we talked about this before too. I firmly believe that healthcare is part of the Constitution and that it falls under the general welfare
Yeah,
portion of that preamble.
yeah.
Um,
Provide for the general
I
welfare. The purpose of government, they said, was to provide for the general welfare.
right,
Yeah,
exactly. And again, I'm not looking for a welfare check, but I,
certain
if
things.
it was provided by the government or
Hmm.
whatever, right? They're not looking to make a profit. And you think about the hypocrisy, where the government is the biggest customer of healthcare, and yet they can't negotiate with these drug companies to get a better
Right,
price,
right.
for like Medicare or any of
Yeah,
these big, companies.
because the
Like that's
lawmakers are all
crazy.
captured by that industry, right?
You're
They're
right.
all,
Right.
it's kind of like where they were with, when big tobacco had that much influence, and they were on the, floor of Congress talking about the health benefits of cigarettes,
All right.
back in the
Yeah.
day. I mean, now today it's, they're captured by the health
So-
insurance and pharma and
Sounds like when they used to put actual cocaine in Coca-Cola.
right. Yeah, well, the medicinal benefits, yeah. It was a tonic for what ails you.
Yeah, I feel so much better
Well,
after I drink it.
so speaking of,
Yeah.
we're going to have RFK Jr. soon in charge of, Health and Human Services in the U.S. So you could see the return of snake oil for real.
Well, he is a doctor, isn't he?
No, he's not. Oh man. Yeah, I mean, part of that whole post rule of law thing that
Yeah.
I mentioned
Yeah.
is, that the, you know, reality, we're a post reality, we've been post reality, but now it's post
Right.
rule of law where, that type of thing, you know,
Define that
hmm
term for
hmm
our audience, so
post
they'll
rule of
know.
law.
Yes.
So in 2015, there was, I think it was a Washington Post article that coined the term post reality, saying
Hmm.
America's entered a post reality society because the adoption of like alternative facts as a term.
Hmm.
I think that was actually what they were talking about at the time, because the right had adopted basically the idea that they live in a different reality, that they don't have
Hmm.
to accept facts, that there are certain things that if they don't want to accept a fact, they don't have to, that they
Hmm.
have their own alternative facts.
Hmm.
So, um, you know, it led to this idea that reality just didn't matter anymore because a certain section of the society had just decided that they weren't going to accept what they were, what was commonly held beliefs before, like,
Right.
that the earth is round,
Hmm.
things like that.
Right.
Um, so now that has led to Donald Trump being reelected
Hmm.
because that post-truth reality led to enough people basically believing Donald Trump's lies about, well, he had the election stolen. He didn't really commit any crimes. And,
Hmm.
he's the one person, in the world that the justice system was rigged against. Everybody else, it's valid, but for him,
Right.
it's all rigged.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and that post-truth, post-reality led to the situation we're in now, where a convicted criminal holds the highest office in the land, and he's
Hmm.
appointing his friends and loyalists to all the cabinet positions to run the government, which
Right.
means the criminals are in charge.
Hmm.
And when that happens, like the day of the election, I actually uh, likened it to the Harry Potter books.
Hmm.
When Voldemort takes control of the government, and what happens, when the
Right.
government gets weaponized against people.
Right.
That's kind of what you could look at if you were
Well,
someone.
their argument has been that it's already weaponized against them. But
Mhm.
if that was the case, then it wouldn't just be, President Trump that would be sought after.
Well, and he would have
There's
been gone after for other things.
well, I
They
mean,
would have gone after him right away. They wouldn't have
you you
waited three
you you
years.
you can say that or whatever, but I can remember a time when Hillary Clinton was, running, and
Hmm.
after she was Secretary of State and all, and again, you may not have liked what happened with her, and but we
Hmm.
were talking about emails. We weren't talking about anything that, was an actual crime. She didn't actually have anyone murdered. She didn't have anyone
Right.
killed.
Right.
It wasn't
They had
like,
her investigated, but couldn't find any
right.
crimes
And there were 17 congressional, what? 17 congressional investigations
into her.
regarding her.
And yeah,
Um, and no one saw that as kind of over the top.
right.
It's hypocrisy, man. But
Hmm.
um,
It's, yeah. With the internet now, we live in, and this is what this election really illustrates, is that
mm,
we've we've built these bubbles around ourselves, where you've customized your feed, they say,
mhm,
how people get information.
right.
And now, yeah, a lot of people were really convinced, are still convinced of that reality that their feed, shows them.
Mhm,
There's a lot going on right now that the feed shows you. I don't know what social media platforms you're on, but there's a lot of people right now with this, in my opinion, really stupid panic about drones.
mhm.
Have you heard about this?
No.
Apparently a bunch of people have been like posting videos and stuff of drones appearing in New Jersey, in the skies over New Jersey. And some people are claiming like, oh, they're UFOs because they're moving really strangely and they're the size of a car or whatnot. And it's like, all the videos I've seen, it's like that's a drone. That's a standard drone. Like
Mhm.
people have not heard of like how like they
Well,
I've,
I
so
hope
they
they're licensed drones. Um,
well, they got FAA lights on them. That's the thing. If it's a UAP, why does it have FAA standard lights?
okay. Well,
But I mean,
let's
that's
not
the
be
thing, is that
hysterical.
a lot of this is the way people get their information, right? Is like
Mhm,
fed to them now.
right.
And so like I started seeing that on my feeds, right?
Mhm,
And it's like you can either choose to engage with it or not. I realize at a certain point that my feed is manipulating me, right? Like
mhm.
if you don't think you're being manipulated, then you're probably
Well,
one
right.
of the worst cases.
It's marketing.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where individuals, where you'll type in something that you want to buy on the internet,
Hmm.
and we have these magical things called
Oh,
cookies,
but it's
and
all connected now. And I've done this
yeah.
experiment with my wife where if you just talk about something in front of your phone,
Mm-hmm.
or if you have like an Echo device or something like that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
if you just so do this experiment where talk about something that you don't have and
Mm-hmm.
like say like I really want to get one of these things, and I wonder how much they cost, or we should check out these things. Um, and then check your social media feeds, and you'll
Mm-hmm.
start seeing ads for that thing.
Right.
Even though you didn't actually type it into a search engine or anything, it
Mm-hmm.
knows, and they're sharing that data. And that's like we've come so far in this
Right.
data collection that, that's
Right. But because that is money,
right.
it's the reason why I used to lease a XT6. And it got to the point where when I would turn it on Sunday morning to head to church, the first thing it would say is it's going to take you such and such with traffic many minutes to get to church. It would
Hmm.
know based on my phone, based on the route that I would take every Sunday, how
Right.
long it's going to take me. Um, you'll have now where with your cell phone, I don't know about Apple, but Android, where you'll get text messages based on where you are, based on retailers, etc. Hey, we have a sale at this, mall that you're near.
You're near, right. Hey, we see
That
you're
that
by this store. Here's a coupon for,
right.
yeah.
And you sign up for these loyalty programs, and you scan, and they know, hey, you buy this and you buy this brand. Hey,
Right.
here's a coupon, 50
Right.
cents off, 75 cents off.
Right.
So the data collection or whatever is part of that. But we're moving away from our
Yeah, the
topic,
original topic of
and
how
and
all of
and
this relates then to what happened to Brian Thompson.
right. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and I don't know if a lot of people knew this, but he was shot. The CEO was shot with a ghost gun,
Oh yeah.
a 3D printed
3D
gun.
printed gun and silencer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and people don't understand the level of danger that could be had with if everyone has a 3D printed gun. Now, the earliest that I can remember hearing about this was in the early or mid aughts when 3D printing had, just started or whatever, and they started
Hmm.
talking about the dangers of 3D printed guns. Now, when
Right.
3D printers first came about, the printing it wasn't as good as it is now. And so people would print 3D gun parts and whatever, and you'd be lucky to get off one shot with those parts.
Right.
But now we've gotten to a point where someone can be shot multiple times with a 3D printed gun. And like you said, a silencer and everything.
Hmm.
Now imagine if everyone had the capability to do that. Hey,
Yeah.
I can just
Well, you
go
do.
home, print out a gun.
I mean,
Uh,
if you
uh,
can afford a 3D printer, you have the capability of doing that.
right. We talk about these school shootings or whatever, and these kids taking their parents' guns. Hey,
Well,
we
I mean,
got a 3D printer at home.
I find it interesting that you brought this up because this is something that I find missing from the conversation in the media about this is that you're right. This is like a combination of all the things the right usually. So he was a wealthy,
Hmm.
conservative, white, Ivy League educated man who used a 3D printed gun and silencer
Hmm.
with no help or support from anybody else. Just did it on his own. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't an
Right.
immigrant. He wasn't, a
Right.
minority. He was like all the things they usually, he wasn't a Democrat. He
Hmm.
turns out he's actually like Republican leaning centrist.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so like all of the things that they normally try to pin these shootings on, he wasn't any of those.
Right.
Um,
Right.
which I mean, yeah, the ghost guns are something that we've I think talked about before. It
We
is a
have.
danger, but yeah, this all goes back to, like I said, post rule of law, right? Like when you have the capability to go do something like that
Hmm.
easily,
Hmm.
right? Like I don't know what his reasoning was, what drove him to the point where he did this, but it's like I
Hmm.
could see where someone they have nothing left to lose, maybe they're, in chronic pain, they feel like it's, dead end.
Right.
It's so easy to access this stuff to go do that kind of thing.
Right.
And they talk about now, oh, they're going to increase security and all that. It's like if the person's willing to give up their own life, it doesn't matter how much
Right.
security you have. Because if
No, it
that person
doesn't.
is determined to kill you and they're willing to give up their own life to do it, like it's really hard to stop someone who could do that. So it's
Right.
like the real solution is not beefing up security. It's like stop doing the things that drive people to do that.
Well, again, the class disparities that I think contribute to something like this are widening. You have individuals that feel, and it's one of the reasons why I think President Trump got reelected, is
Hmm.
that hey, we feel hopeless. Now,
Hmm.
I don't believe that President Trump is going to be able to do any of the things that the
No,
those who voted for him
no,
put him in office. But
yeah,
again, they are at a certain point where they just feel like, hey, grocery prices are up, gas prices are up. These companies
hmm,
are making, I mean, record profits, and
yeah,
and and yet the common man, the everyday guy, everybody is not destined to be a millionaire. We
right,
need people to come by every week to pick up the trash. That guy who's driving that truck or actually picking up the trash cans and throwing them in the back, that guy is probably never going to be a millionaire. But he shouldn't have to be because we need someone to fill that job, that role.
right,
And why,
yeah,
but why is it that someone who can do that job faithfully for 25, 30 years can't retire at a reasonable with
yeah,
a reasonable amount of money and healthcare and security?
yeah.
That
It.
shouldn't be the fault, the
I
problem.
agree. I agree. I mean, you're not wrong. we could actually do a whole episode on this because ultimately what this comes down to is there is real short. The whole reason behind all of this, the whole reason that the healthcare companies do this and that all of that happens is because of shareholder primacy, because of this
Hmm.
belief that the only thing that matters in our country is shareholders
Hmm.
and that shareholders are getting the maximum return on their dollar. And so
Right.
therefore they treat humans as resources. And they say that, the only thing that matters is squeezing the most work for the least money out of everyone,
Hmm.
except for the executives. Everyone
Hmm.
else, so that's what they do because they
Right.
believe and the thing that kills me is that they saw this coming. So and I have to look up the video clip, but there was a guy who told the rich like 10 years ago that the pitchforks are coming.
Hmm.
That you guys need to, fix this system because the pitchforks are coming because the inequity is getting too bad and people are getting too pissed.
Hmm.
And he told them. And in 2019, there was, and I'll look this up, but there was a group of 200 of the largest companies who wrote this paper called What the Purpose of Capitalism Is, where
Hmm.
they rejected the idea of shareholder primacy and they stated that they were embracing stakeholder primacy, where the
Hmm.
idea of everyone, including the employees and the customers and the people who live around their business, all have a stake in it
Right.
and that they all basically need to be taken into consideration, that they can't just think of the shareholders, that they have
Hmm.
responsibility to everybody.
Right.
And they acknowledged that in 2019, but that hasn't gone anywhere since then, and
Right.
that's really the problem is that they see the problem, they know what's happening, but it's like they're on a train that's got so much momentum and it's like even they can't seem to stop it. And the problem is where it ends is in situations like what happened with Brian Thompson, or
Right.
where the the quote there was when peaceful revolution is made impossible, violent revolution becomes inevitable.
Hmm.
And I don't remember who said that. I think it
Hmm.
was JFK, but I might be
Okay.
wrong. But that's what's happening.
Right.
If you take away everybody's peaceful avenue for changing things. If peaceful protest simply has no effect, right? And they've
Hmm.
created systems to be able to ignore it
Hmm.
and shunt it to the side, then people are only going to continue to do that for so long.
Right. Well,
You
you mentioned stakeholders, and
Yeah,
I think that's an appropriate term because, like you said, everyone from the smallest employee to the top has a role to fill in that company. And again, if the trash isn't being picked up, then that causes a terrible work environment.
yep.
People can't get and work at their desk, etc. Hey,
Yeah.
if the toilets aren't working, you
Actually,
know.
quick story. When I lived in California in the early 90s, San Francisco had a trash collector strike.
Hmm.
And the result, like you said, when the trash isn't getting picked up, people notice quick.
Right.
And this was in the early 90s. I remember that their union, whatever it was at the time, had won a six-figure salary after the strike in the negotiations because it was so effective. Because, like you
Hmm.
said, there are certain services that, if people
Right.
stop doing it,
Right. I mean,
society
again,
can't
hey,
function.
you may not appreciate it until
Right.
it's not being done. But that's what I'm
Right.
saying.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that the janitor has the same role to fill as the CEO. But guess what? They
It's
are
critical.
part of that call. I
Well,
mean, even the biggest machine has a lug nut, a cog, or something, a gear that is crucial to the overall function of that machine. And if it breaks down, it might not be the biggest, it might not be, the most important, but guess what? The rest of the machine doesn't operate effectively.
we understood this in 2020 when we were understood that all those people are essential workers.
Hmm.
We understood that. Like when
Right.
society, like when that happened and rubber met the road, we all kind of collectively understood who they were. And now somehow we re-entered that delusion once society started working again that oh, well, it's okay that those jobs are in poverty, even though we all know very
Hmm.
well that those jobs are essential and that they need to be done and that
Right.
they should be done. They should pay a living wage.
Hmm.
Everybody who does anything full time should make a living wage. That's just the purpose of business. That's
Hmm.
the choice that we make as a society. Either business exists to serve the needs of society, or it's the other way around, where
Hmm.
you exist to serve the needs of the business.
Right.
And which kind of society do you want to live in?
Right.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
It's funny because when I was 16, I used to work at McDonald's. And I can remember it was a few older, ladies and gentlemen that would work say the day shift.
mhm,
And most times if you're in school or whatever, I was in high school, you couldn't work the early shift on a
right,
weekday
right,
during the school year.
right,
So a lot of those individuals would be older women and men or whatever.
right.
Now, but it's gotten to the point where now they are retirees that are working at McDonald's, either
Make ends
part-time or
meet.
full-time, to make a living wage
Right,
or whatever in retirement. They
right.
can't, support themselves.
Yeah,
And now a lot of young folks don't get those jobs because, okay, right, you've taken that job away from me. And nobody's, I don't think, there hasn't been a whole lot of about that okay, they took my job. Now what do I go do? You
right.
know,
Yeah,
I'm a young guy. I want to make some money in the summer or whatever, get some experience and say, hey, I worked at McDonald's or wherever, Burger King. You don't have that many opportunities now because there are adults that are working at those jobs full time trying to make a living.
yeah,
It's a
yeah.
shame.
It is. And now, with Donald Trump coming in, they're talking that they want to cut Social Security
Yeah.
by billions. Even
Hey,
though
well,
Social Security is not part of the general budget and it's a
he-
trust fund we've all paid into our whole lives, they
yeah.
want to steal that money.
Hey, Florida voted for him, right? Lot
Yeah,
of lot of retirees and Social Security recipients down there in Florida,
yeah, yeah,
Arizona.
yeah. People, I don't know, man. I mean, individuals can be very smart and intelligent, but people as a whole, people in groups, so easily frightened and manipulated.
Hey, I can remember back when President Obama was in office and the Tea Party, was in full effect then, and there was a protest on Capitol Hill, and a lady had a sign up said, "I don't want the government's hands on my Medicare," or something like that.
Yeah,
And it's like, lady, that is the government.
yeah.
Medicare is the government. Like, come on.
Well, it's like there's people after this election who apparently had been convinced somehow that they were voting against Obamacare because they didn't like Obamacare and they want the Republicans to get rid of Obamacare,
Right, right.
but they need the ACA
Yeah,
and because they didn't realize it was the same thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Listen, he still says that he wants to do his own healthcare thing.
Yeah.
I mean, we're literally talking about 4 years after he last got in the office
And this
or
is,
out of office,
yeah,
and you still don't have a concrete plan. I mean,
right.
I'm not saying that I would agree with it. I'm not saying that it would be good, but you still don't have something that we can look at and make some kind of assessment of. Like, really?
Yeah. Maybe, maybe it'll go so crazy, it'll swing back around to sane and he'll institute universal health care. You know, maybe that'll be like that. The chances of like the same as like a blind cross the court, free throw going in, but maybe.
I mean, anything's possible. Anything is possible. Right. Now, if that happens, more power to them. And I'm sure that there will be those that will say President Trump is the greatest president that ever lived.
Right, because he
But
gives us
I,
like
I,
universal health care, which they've
yeah,
been
that,
against with their whole lives until then, but suddenly Trump says it and they're
well,
for it.
it's,
And if
it's,
that's what
it's,
it
it's
takes,
literally
fine.
probably the only thing that he would be able to do to say, like, yeah, I've implemented Trump care. We no longer need Obamacare.
Right,
I've created Trump care, health care for all. If he does that, great.
right.
But again, I don't believe it. I'd
I
have
think
to see it to believe
that would be like that would be Saturday Night Live would have to go out of business because they couldn't even make up something as funny as that. Where it would be like the Republicans would come to the Democrats and be like, "We have this bill for Trump care." And they're thinking like, the Democrats will be against it. It's like universal health care for everybody. But we're going to call it Trump care. Democrats are like, okay. I mean, all right, let's do it.
it. Yeah, that would be hilarious. It would be hilarious, man. But hey, I'd be all for it. If it happens, great. But I have to see it to believe it.
Yeah.
I'm not
I
gonna believe
doubt it.
it.
Really don't think it's going to happen, but
Yeah.
all
Right.
right. I think we're running out of time here.
Okay. Well,
Any
good
last thoughts
conversation.
on
Good conversations. And we'll have to pick this up on another, when we get more details about the murder. But
well,
this is Anthony Gentry and Kyle Palmerville signing off. Please like and subscribe. And we hope to see you on another episode of Intellicide. And I will talk to you later.